I'd been mopping the same floor for 11 years, and I found the door that saved my life because I tripped over a mop bucket running from a dead woman. Her name was Claire Jessup. She sang alto in the Sunday choir. She had a voice that could pull tears from men who didn't believe in anything. And when she came through the side entrance of Grace Covenant Baptist Church at 6:40 on a Tuesday evening, she wasn't singing. She was making a sound I'd never heard from a human throat. A rasping, rhythmic exhale, like breath being forced through a broken instrument. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder and dark with something I didn't want to identify. And she moved with a lopsided urgency that brought her from the door to the center of the fellowship hall before I fully understood what I was seeing. I'm Eli Marsh. I've been the custodian at Grace Covenant since I was 31. Before that, I was nothing in particular. Odd jobs, a failed attempt at community college, 2 years working the counter at a feed store in Harlan County. I ended up at the church because Pastor Briggs needed someone to maintain the building and didn't care about resumes. I'm not a survivalist. I'm not former military. I'm a man who knows where the fuse box is and which pew has the loose bolt and how to get candle wax out of carpet. That's what I brought to the end of the world. Claire crossed the fellowship hall and I backed into the supply closet, pulling the door shut. Through the gap at the hinges, I watched her stop, turn her head, and orient toward the sound of my breathing. She took 3 steps toward the closet, and I retreated further, bumping the mop bucket, sending it clattering across the concrete floor of the back corridor I'd retreated into. The corridor ran behind the fellowship hall, a service passage that connected the kitchen, the boiler room, and the old storage areas beneath the original sanctuary. I'd walked it 1,000 times, but I'd never run it in the dark. And when I stumbled over the bucket and caught myself against the wall, my hand hit something that wasn't wall. A seam, a ridge of metal beneath peeling paint, running vertically from floor to ceiling. I didn't have time to investigate. Claire was in the corridor now, drawn by the noise, and I kept moving. Through the boiler room, past the water heater, into the furthest storage alcove where the church kept holiday decorations and broken furniture. Dead end. No exit. I pressed myself against the back wall and listened to her footsteps growing closer. And my hand, flat against the wall behind me, found a handle. Not a wall, a door. Painted over, layered with decades of latex and primer until it was nearly invisible. But underneath, steel, heavy. I twisted the handle and it resisted, then gave. The door swung inward on silent hinges, and I fell backward into darkness and pulled it shut behind me. The latch caught. On the other side, Claire hit the door once, twice, and the steel didn't flex. The sound of her faded as she lost interest, drawn away by something else. A creak in the building, a noise from outside. I was standing on a metal landing at the top of a staircase that descended into absolute black. The air was different. Cool, dry, filtered. There was a handrail, and I gripped it and went down, because the only alternative was opening the door again. 14 steps. I counted. At the bottom, my hand found a wall-mounted switch. I flipped it, and fluorescent tubes buzzed to life in sequence, illuminating a space that made no rational sense beneath a rural Baptist church. The vault. The room was approximately 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, with poured concrete walls and a ceiling just over 7 feet high. The floor was sealed concrete, smooth and gray. Along the left wall, steel shelving units held rows of labeled containers. Food, water purification supplies, medical kits, batteries. Along the right wall, a workbench with tools, a hand crank radio, and a compact generator connected to a ventilation system that hummed almost below the threshold of hearing. At the far end, A partition wall with a door that I'd later discover led to a smaller room with 4 cots, a chemical toilet, and more storage. Everything was organized with a precision that suggested not just preparation, but obsession. The containers were dated. The oldest labels read 2003. The newest were from just months ago. Fresh water purification tablets, sealed bags of freeze-dried meals, a first aid kit with expiration dates extending into 2028. Someone had been maintaining this space for over 20 years, stocking it, updating it. I stood in the middle of the room and turned a slow circle and tried to reconcile what I was seeing with what I knew about Grace Covenant Baptist Church, which was everything. Every inch of the building above, its plumbing and its history and its leaks. I knew the church. I did not know this. A binder sat on the workbench. I opened it. The first page was typed, clean, undated. This facility was constructed in 2002 under the direction of the Board of Elders. Its purpose is the preservation of essential personnel and community continuity in the event of catastrophic emergency. Access is restricted to authorized individuals. Maintain secrecy to prevent compromise. Essential personnel. The phrase sat in my stomach like a stone. I was the custodian. I'd worked in this building for over a decade. Nobody had told me. Not Pastor Briggs, who'd hired me. Not the deacons. Not the elders who met in the conference room on the first Wednesday of every month with the door closed. I read further. The binder contained an inventory log, updated by hand in several different scripts. Maintenance schedules. A hand-drawn schematic showing the ventilation route. It pulled air from a concealed intake on the north face of the church, filtered it twice, and exhausted through a pipe disguised as a drainage conduit. Elegant, invisible unless you knew what you were looking at. And I hadn't known. 11 years, and I'd walked past the intake vent, the exhaust pipe, the painted-over door, and seen nothing. Because I wasn't essential personnel. I was the man with the mop. The binder's final section was a list of names. 7 names, each one familiar. Elder Warren Ackerman, Elder Thomas Poole, Deacon Martha Sykes, Deacon Randall Vick, Pastor Leonard Briggs, Helen Briggs, his wife, Dr. Catherine Webb, the church's unofficial physician, a family practitioner who attended the early service and donated to the building fund every Christmas. 7 names, 7 people who knew. None of them were me. Above me, muffled by steel and concrete, something hit the fellowship hall floor with a sound like a body falling. Then another. I turned off the overhead lights, sat on the workbench stool in the dark, and waited. The ventilation system breathed for me. For 2 hours I sat there. The hand crank radio produced nothing. Static across every frequency, the same silence the whole country was swimming in. The outbreak had been building for a week before Claire walked into the fellowship hall. First the news reports from cities Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, each one further from our small corner of Kentucky than the last, each one closer than it should have been to ordinary life. Then the governor's emergency declaration. Then the cell towers going intermittent. Then silence. I hadn't evacuated because I hadn't known where to go. My apartment was a rental above the hardware store on Main. The church was the only building I knew completely. When things got bad enough to leave the apartment, I'd come here too. What? Lock the doors and pray? I'm not even a religious man. I just didn't have anywhere else. Now I was in a room that wasn't meant for me, eating food that wasn't stocked for me, breathing air that someone had engineered for 7 people whose names were on a list that didn't include mine. I slept on a cot that night. 4 hours of the bottomless, involuntary sleep that comes after sustained terror. I woke to silence, real silence, the kind that only exists underground. And for 3 dislocated seconds, I didn't know where I was. The vault was still there. The fluorescent lights buzzed when I flipped the switch. The inventory was still meticulously arranged. It hadn't been a dream. I ate a packet of freeze-dried oatmeal reconstituted with water from a sealed container, and it tasted like sawdust mixed with survival. Then I went to the door at the top of the stairs and pressed my ear against the steel. Nothing. No footsteps, no rasping breath, no Claire. I eased the handle and opened the door a crack. The storage alcove was empty. Dim light filtered in from the corridor. Daylight, reaching this far into the building through windows, I knew. The air upstairs was different from the vault air. Warmer, stale, with a faint sweetness that I'd later learned to associate with proximity. I moved through the boiler room and into the corridor and stopped. The fellowship hall had been entered, not just by Claire. The side door was wide open, and 3 folding chairs near the entrance had been knocked flat. Muddy footprints tracked across the floor in patterns that didn't make sense. Overlapping, circular, the paths of things moving without direction. But the hall was empty now. Whatever had been here had moved on. I closed the side door and locked it. Then the front entrance. Then the kitchen access. Then the door to the education wing. I moved through the building the way I'd moved through it every day for 11 years. Systematically, room by room. Except now I was checking for broken glass and unlocked windows and anything that breathed wrong. The church was a large building. The main sanctuary with seating for 300. The fellowship hall, a kitchen, 6 classrooms in the education wing, Pastor Briggs's office, the conference room, 2 bathrooms, and the bell tower accessible by a narrow staircase that I'd climbed exactly once and never intended to climb again. Everything was intact. Windows closed, doors lockable, no breach points I could see. Grace Covenant was stone and timber, built in 1924 and expanded in the 70s. The walls were thick, the windows were narrow, the old-fashioned kind. Tall but not wide, and high off the ground. Not impenetrable, but resistant. I locked every door and latched every window, and went back to the vault, and sat with the binder and read the inventory again, this time carefully. The food supply, at the ration schedule outlined in the binder, would sustain 7 people for 90 days. 7 people. If it was just me, the math changed dramatically. 1 person, 90 days of supplies, meant for 7. The food alone could stretch past a year if I was disciplined. I didn't want to do the math. Doing the math meant accepting that I might be here alone for a year. And some part of me was still expecting the emergency broadcast to resume. The National Guard to roll through Main Street, Pastor Briggs to knock on the church door and tell me this had all been a terrible week, but the crisis was over. But another part of me, the part that had been maintaining a building alone for a decade, the part that knew how to fix things nobody noticed, and keep systems running that nobody thought about, that part was already planning. Already mapping the church's resources against the vault's supplies, calculating water, estimating how long the generator fuel would last, thinking about the ventilation system and whether the air intake could be compromised from outside. I was alone, in a room built for people who didn't think I mattered enough to tell, with enough supplies to outlast the thing happening above me. I didn't know whether to feel saved or erased. The first knock came on day 3. I'd established a routine. Dawn patrol through the church, checking locks and windows, then retreat to the vault for meals and sleep. The upstairs was my monitoring post. The vault was my safe room. The separation felt important, like the difference between the part of your mind that faces the world and the part that hides from it. The knock was on the front entrance of the sanctuary. 3 rapid hits, a pause, 3 more. Human rhythm, deliberate. I crept to the narthex and looked through the narrow window beside the door. A woman and a teenage girl. The woman was holding a tire iron, and the girl was holding the woman's coat with both fists. They were both looking over their shoulders at the parking lot, where two figures were shuffling between the abandoned cars with the aimless menace I'd started to recognize. I opened the door. They came in fast, and I locked it behind them. The woman was Diane Okafor, 43, an accountant who lived in the subdivision east of town. The girl was her daughter, Mia, 16, with long braids and the hollowed-out expression of someone who'd stopped sleeping days ago. Diane was controlled, precise, and radiating a competence that felt almost aggressive. She scanned the narthex the way I'd seen building inspectors scan a room, cataloging, assessing, judging. "Is anyone else here?" she asked. "Just me." "How long?" 3 days. "What do you have?" I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to help. I'd opened the door, I'd already decided. But because the vault was a secret, and the reflex to protect it surprised me with its intensity. I told her about the church's supplies. The kitchen, the stored water, the food pantry the congregation maintained for community outreach. I didn't mention the vault. The lie, the omission, sat in my mouth like a coin. I could taste it. Diane and Mia had been in their house for 2 days after the grid went down. They'd left when a group of infected had broken through a neighbor's sliding glass door, and the screaming had drawn more. They'd moved on foot, avoiding main roads, and reached the church because Diane had driven past it every day on her commute, and remembered it as a solid building on high ground. "My husband is in Lexington," Diane said, sitting in a pew with her hands clasped between her knees. The tire iron was on the seat beside her, within reach. "He was there for work when the highways closed. I don't know if he's—" She stopped. "We need a place." "Is this a place?" "It's a place," I said. Mia spoke for the first time. "Are we safe here?" I told her the truth, or the version of it I could manage. "The building is secure. The walls are thick. The windows are high. The doors are locked. Nothing's gotten in since I've been here." Mia nodded. She didn't look reassured. She looked like someone performing the act of accepting reassurance, because the alternative was unbearable. That night, I showed them the kitchen and the food pantry. We ate canned soup heated on a camping stove I'd found in the education wing's closet. And Diane inventoried the pantry with professional thoroughness. Her count was more precise than mine had been. She found items I'd overlooked, calculated caloric values, projected timelines. 3 people, this supply. Maybe 4 weeks if we're careful, she said. After that, we're scavenging. 4 weeks. With the vault, it could be months, a year. But I said nothing. The vault was mine. Not because I deserved it or had earned it, but because it was the only advantage I had, the only secret I'd ever possessed. And sharing it meant dividing the one resource that made my survival certain into fractions that might not be enough for anyone. I hated myself for the calculation. I did it anyway. Day 5 brought Warren Ackerman. Of the 7 names in the binder, his was the first I'd expected to see. Elder Warren Ackerman, 71, retired engineer. The man who I would learn had designed the vault. He arrived not through the front door, but through the basement. Through a second entrance I hadn't discovered. A narrow tunnel that connected the vault to an egress point 50 yards north of the church, concealed beneath a maintenance hatch in the cemetery. I was in the vault when I heard it. A grinding sound, metal on concrete, from behind the far partition. I grabbed a flashlight, the only weapon within reach, and went through the door to the sleeping area. In the back wall, behind the cots I'd pushed aside, a panel had opened. It had looked like wall. It was a door, flush-mounted, invisible when closed. Warren came through it on his hands and knees, covered in mud, breathing hard. He looked up at me from the floor, and his face registered surprise, then confusion, then something harder. "Eli," he said, "how did you get in here?" "The door upstairs, in the storage alcove." He closed his eyes. That door was supposed to be sealed from the inside during the last maintenance cycle. I didn't get to it. He sat up, his back against the wall, and caught his breath. He was a big man, broad-shouldered even at 71. But the crawl through the tunnel had depleted him. His khaki pants were torn at both knees, and his hands were scraped raw. "You built this?" I said. It wasn't a question. "I designed it. The board approved the funding. We contracted the construction as a foundation reinforcement project. Nobody outside the board knew. I've worked here for 11 years, Warren." He met my eyes. There was no apology in his expression, no embarrassment. Just the flat pragmatism of a man who had made a decision long ago and didn't intend to relitigate it. The vault seats 7. The list was determined by the board based on skills essential to community rebuilding: medical knowledge, engineering, pastoral leadership, financial management. It wasn't personal. It feels personal. I understand that, but we're past that now. He stood slowly and surveyed the vault with the proprietary attention of a builder revisiting his work. He checked the ventilation, the generator, the water filtration. Everything met his standards. He nodded to himself. "Who else is in the building?" "2 others, a woman and her daughter, upstairs." "Do they know about this?" "No." He looked at me for a long moment. "Good. Let's keep it that way." The word "good" landed between us with a weight that surprised me. He was telling me that the secret I'd been keeping, the one I'd felt guilty about, the one that scraped at me every time Diane calculated rations from the pantry, was correct, was policy, was the plan. "The vault is for the 7, he said. That was always the protocol. If others come, we shelter them in the church. The vault remains separate, secure. There are 2 people upstairs eating soup from a can, Warren. The pantry lasts 4 weeks. Then we manage that. But the vault's supplies are the long-term reserve. If we open it to everyone who knocks, we're all dead in 90 days. He wasn't wrong. I knew he wasn't wrong. And I hated that he wasn't wrong. Because being right about who gets to survive is the ugliest kind of right there is. Warren integrated into the upstairs group with a smoothness I wouldn't have expected. He introduced himself as a neighbor who'd come through the cemetery. True. And offered his engineering skills for fortification. Also true. He said nothing about the vault, the tunnel, or the binder. He helped Diane reinforce the ground floor windows with pewbacks and hymnals used as shims. And he assessed the church's structural integrity with the authority of someone who'd been thinking about buildings his entire adult life. Diane trusted him almost immediately. His age, his competence, his calm. He read as an elder in both senses. Mia kept her distance, watching him with the alert stillness that had become her default expression. She reminded me of a cat that had been startled once and never fully settled back down. I pulled Warren aside on the evening of day 6. We stood in Pastor Briggs's office with the door closed, speaking quietly. "The other names on the list," I said. "Pastor Briggs, Helen, Thomas Poole, Martha Sykes, Randall Vick, Dr. Webb. Are they coming?" Warren sat in the pastor's chair, and the leather creaked. "Leonard and Helen left town 3 days before the grid went down. Her sister in Virginia. They might not even know how bad it's gotten." He paused. Thomas Poole was on the east side when the first wave hit. I saw his truck in the ditch on Route 15 with the door open. I didn't stop to check. The silence after that was specific. The silence of acknowledging a death that hasn't been confirmed and never will be. Martha Sykes has a bunker of her own. She was always the one who thought we weren't doing enough. She may be underground somewhere right now. Randall Vick. I don't know. Dr. Webb. I don't know. So it's you. Of the 7, it's you. For now. And the vault sits mostly empty while 2 people upstairs are rationing soup. Warren leaned forward. Eli, I understand your impulse. It's decent. But decency and strategy aren't the same thing. If we reveal the vault, we lose control of it. If we lose control of it, we lose the resource. People don't ration when they know abundance is available. They consume. It's not a moral failing. It's human nature. Diane isn't reckless. She's an accountant. She understands resource management better than either of us. She understands managing other people's resources. When it's her daughter's life on the line, the math changes. I couldn't argue with him because I didn't know if he was right or wrong. Both possibilities coexisted, and the space between them was exactly where the decision had to be made. Tell Diane and Mia about the vault. Give them access, share everything equally, and trust that cooperation would outlast fear. Or maintain the separation, keep the long-term reserve intact, and accept the moral cost of watching 2 people worry about running out of food while a year's supply sat beneath their feet. I didn't decide that night. The decision sat in me like a splinter, working its way deeper. On day 8, the church received its 3rd group. I use the word received deliberately. We didn't choose them. They appeared. 3 men, 2 women, arriving in a battered pickup truck that rolled into the parking lot, trailing steam from a cracked radiator. From the bell tower, where I'd started spending my watch hours because it offered the best sight lines, I saw them bail out of the cab and the truck bed and sprint for the church doors with 6 infected following 30 yards behind. Diane was at the front entrance. She made the call. She opened the doors and they poured in, and she slammed the doors shut, and the infected hit them 4 seconds later. The doors held. Solid oak, iron hinges, built in an era when churches were constructed to survive weather and time and the accumulated weight of community grief. The infected pounded for 20 minutes and then lost cohesion and drifted away. The newcomers were a family and 2 strangers who'd been traveling together since the highway interchange south of town became impassable. The family, Ray and Sandra Whitfield, married, early 40s, from a farm on the county line. Ray was big, sunburned, silent. Sandra was small and sharp and talked enough for both of them. The 2 strangers, Neil Parr, a 20-something college student who'd been driving home from Bowling Green when the outbreak overtook the highway, and Tessa Grimes, a woman in her late 30s who'd been a dispatcher at the county 911 center until the phones went dead. Tessa was the one who concerned me, not because of anything she did. She was quiet, cooperative, helped in the kitchen without being asked. It was her eyes. She had the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd been hearing people die over a radio for days before the radio went silent. She'd been the last voice on the line for people who were being torn apart in their homes, and she carried every one of those calls in a way that was visible if you knew what to look at. 9 people in the church now. The pantry math was brutal. Diane ran the numbers that evening and presented them without emotion. 2 weeks, maybe 18 days if we cut portions. Warren was standing behind her. He didn't look at me. I didn't look at him. The vault, with its year of supplies for 1 person, or its 90 days for 7, existed beneath us, like a second heartbeat that only 2 of us could hear. Ray Whitfield spoke up. We passed a grocery store on the way in. Smaller place, a Family Dollar. Windows were busted, but the building was standing. Shelves might still have stock. How far? I asked. Quarter mile, south on Main, past the barber shop. How many infected between here and there? Ray looked at his wife. Sandra said, we counted 8 or 9 near the intersection. Could be more inside buildings. Marcus. No, I caught myself. There was no Marcus here. There was me and Warren and a group of people who'd arrived carrying nothing but their fear and the assumption that a church would save them. I was the one who knew the building. I was the one who'd been here longest. The responsibility I hadn't asked for was settling on me, like snowfall. Gradual, accumulating, impossible to shrug off. I'll go, I said. Tomorrow morning, early. I need 2 more. Ray volunteered immediately. Neil, after a pause in which I watched him decide to be brave, raised his hand. The supply run nearly killed us before we left the parking lot. We went at dawn. Gray light, mist off the hills, the kind of morning that would have been beautiful in a world that still had beauty to spare. Ray carried a fire axe we'd found in the church's utility closet. Neil had a crowbar. I had a hammer and a canvas bag for carrying supplies. Weapons of proximity, not distance. Nobody had a gun. The parking lot was clear. We crossed it in a loose triangle. Ray on point, me left, Neil right, and reached the sidewalk on Main Street. The town looked concussed. Cars at odd angles, storefront glass spiderwebbed or gone entirely, paper and debris in gutters. The Family Dollar was visible 3 blocks south, its yellow sign still legible. We'd covered 1 block when Neil grabbed my arm. To our right, in the doorway of the barber shop, a figure was standing motionless. Male, heavy-set, wearing a work shirt with a name patch I couldn't read at this distance. It wasn't moving. Its head was tilted at an angle that suggested the muscles responsible for holding it upright had partially failed. It was watching us. Or rather, it was oriented toward us. Its ruined face pointed in our direction with that absent intensity I'd seen in Claire. In the parking lot figures, in every one of them. We froze. 10 seconds. 20. The figure didn't advance. Ray gestured forward and we moved, slowly, keeping to the far side of the street. The figure tracked us with its head but didn't follow. Whatever threshold of stimulus triggered their pursuit, we hadn't crossed it. The Family Dollar's front windows were shattered, as Ray had said. Inside, the store was dim and wrecked. Shelves toppled, product scattered across the floor, a smell of spoiled milk and something worse underneath it. But Ray was right about the stock. The looters or the panicked shoppers who'd torn through here had taken the obvious things. Water, batteries, bread, but left behind what they hadn't thought to grab. Canned vegetables, dried pasta, powdered milk. Bags of rice that had fallen behind a display and been forgotten. I filled the canvas bag, and Ray filled a garbage bag, and Neil found a handbasket and filled that. We were efficient. We were quiet. We were in the store for 11 minutes. I was counting. On the way back, with our bags heavy and our attention split between the wait and the street, we turned the corner onto the block nearest the church and found the barber shop figure no longer alone. 7 more had gathered in the intersection, a loose cluster milling between the cars, and our path to the church cut directly through them. Ray stopped. Back way. We retreated a block and circled east, cutting through an alley behind the hardware store. The alley was narrow, fenced on one side, lined with dumpsters. It was also occupied. A single infected, a young woman in a fast food uniform, was crouched against a dumpster at the midpoint. She saw us, or sensed us, and stood. and the sound she made was a high, thin whine that carried further than I would have thought possible. Ray hit her with the fire axe. The sound was something I can't put into words and won't try to. She went down and didn't get up, and the three of us ran the remaining distance to the church's side entrance, where Diane was waiting with the door open and the bolt ready. We got inside. The door closed. Neil sat down on the floor of the fellowship hall and put his head in his hands, and his shoulders shook, and nobody said anything because there was nothing to say. The supplies bought us another 10 days. On the night of day 11, Tessa found the vault. I don't know how. I've gone over it 100 times. Maybe she noticed my pattern. The way I disappear for stretches, always toward the back of the building, always returning from the same direction. Maybe she heard the ventilation through the walls, a sound so faint that only someone accustomed to listening for things others couldn't hear. A dispatcher, someone whose entire skill set was built on detecting voices through noise, would have registered it. Maybe she simply explored, because the church was a closed world, and closed worlds get explored by people with restless minds. She confronted me in the corridor behind the boiler room. No preamble, no accusation. She just said, "There's a room behind the storage alcove. I can hear it." I should have lied. I should have said she was hearing the boiler, the pipes, the building settling. But Tessa looked at me with those dispatcher's eyes, the ones that had heard people dying and kept a steady voice through all of it. And I understood that lying to her would be both pointless and corrosive. "Yes," I said. "Show me." I showed her. I took her down the stairs and turned on the lights and watched her face as she took in the shelving, the supplies, the cots, the ventilation system. She walked the length of the room, reading labels, checking dates. She didn't touch anything. She came back to where I was standing at the base of the stairs and looked at me for a long time. "How long have you known?" "Since the first night." "And the old man, Warren, he knows. He built it." She processed this with the same operational calm she'd brought to everything else. I could see her running the numbers. The same numbers I'd run. The same numbers Warren had used to justify the silence. Supplies for 7, stretched across 90 days. 9 people in the church. The math that kept the secret was the same math that condemned the secret. "Who was it for?" she asked. "Church leadership, a list of 7. Are they here?" "Warren is. The rest didn't make it, or they went somewhere else." So this vault, stocked for 7, designed for 7, is serving one man who built it and one man who found it by accident. That's correct. While 9 people upstairs are eating canned green beans and counting the days until the food runs out. That's also correct. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't call me a coward or a liar. She said, "You're going to tell them, tonight. Tessa. There's a girl upstairs, 16 years old. She's losing weight. She gave half her dinner to Neil last night because he looked sick. She's rationing herself to death to keep other people fed. And beneath her feet is a year's worth of food." Tessa paused. "You tell them, or I do. And if I do it, I tell them you've known the whole time. You choose how this goes." It wasn't a threat. It was a description of 2 possible futures. And in one of them, I was the man who came clean, and in the other, I was the man who got exposed. The difference between those 2 men was the only moral currency I had left. "Give me until morning," I said. She held my gaze, weighing the request. Then she nodded. "Morning." I told Warren first. Midnight, in Pastor Briggs's office, the door closed. His reaction was what I expected. Controlled fury, directed not at me, but at the breach in the system he'd designed. She can hear the ventilation, he said, as if this were a design flaw he was already redesigning in his mind. The ductwork runs too close to the boiler room wall. I should have insulated it. Warren, she's right. She's right morally. She's wrong strategically. The strategy doesn't matter if the group fractures. If they find out we've been hiding this, not from Tessa, from Diane, from all of them, they won't trust us. And trust is the only thing holding 9 people together in a church. He sat behind the pastor's desk and pressed his palms flat against its surface, the way I'd seen him do when he was thinking through load-bearing calculations. Transferring weight, finding the structure beneath the problem. You've been the custodian here for 11 years, he said. You've seen what happens to this congregation when resources get tight. The budget fights, the building committee arguments. People are generous in abundance and territorial in scarcity. If we open the vault to everyone, the consumption rate triples. That 90-day supply becomes 30. And in 30 days, when it's gone, we're in the same position, except now there's nothing left. Then we ration. Diane can manage it. That's literally what she does. Diane will manage it for her daughter's benefit. Ray will manage it for Sandra's. Everyone will manage it for their own. Or they'll manage it for the group, because that's also what people do. Warren looked at me. In the candlelight, we were burning candles to save generator fuel. His face was all shadows and planes, the face of a man who had spent 20 years preparing for the worst and was now confronting the possibility that his preparation had accounted for everything except the people. I'll defer to you, he said quietly. You know these people better than I do. You've been here longer. If you think they can hold together, if you're willing to take responsibility for that judgment, I'll follow your lead. It was the most trust anyone had ever placed in me. It was also, I understood later, a transfer of blame. If the vault was opened and the supplies ran out and people starved, it would be my decision that had done it. Warren was an engineer. He understood load-bearing. He'd just shifted the weight. I gathered everyone in the sanctuary at dawn. All 9 of us, sitting in pews that had held hundreds, the space around us enormous and empty. I stood at the front, not at the pulpit. I couldn't bring myself to stand there. But at the communion table, which felt appropriate in a way I didn't examine too closely. I told them everything. The vault, the door, the supplies, the list of 7, Warren's role. I told them I'd known since the first night, and had said nothing. I told them Tessa had discovered it and forced the disclosure. I didn't soften it. I didn't justify it. I stood there and told the truth and watched it land. Diane's face went through stages I could track. Surprise, comprehension, anger, calculation. Ray's jaw tightened, and he looked at Warren with an expression that contained the possibility of violence before Sandra's hand on his arm pulled it back. Neil stared at the floor. Mia stared at me. Tessa stood against the wall with her arms crossed and watched everyone else. The silence lasted a long time. "Show us," Diane said. I led them down. All 9 of us in the vault, which was never meant to hold more than 7 and felt crowded with 9 bodies and the accumulated weight of the secret that had just been broken. They walked the room the way Tessa had, reading labels, checking dates, measuring the space with their eyes. Warren stood near the workbench and answered questions with the careful precision of a man testifying. He explained the design, the ventilation, the capacity. He explained the rationale for secrecy. He didn't apologize. Diane ran the numbers on a piece of paper torn from the binder. Her handwriting was small and exact. When she finished, she set the paper on the workbench and tapped it with her pen. Combined. Pantry and vault. We have supplies for 9 people for approximately 70 days at standard rationing. Reduced rationing, 90 to 100. Extreme conservation, 120. 120 days, Ray repeated. Then what? Then we're either rescued, resupplied, or we've found another source. And if none of those happen? Diane looked at him evenly. Then we've bought ourselves 4 months of life, which is 4 months more than we had yesterday. The practicality of it. The flat acknowledgement that survival was measured in increments, not guarantees, settled the room, not comfortably. There was still anger. Ray didn't speak to Warren for 3 days. Mia looked at me with something I recognized as recalibrated trust. She still trusted me, but the calibration had changed. The margin of error had widened. Neil seemed almost relieved, as if the existence of the vault was less disturbing than the idea that there was nothing beneath them but dirt. Tessa became the supply manager. Not Diane. Diane offered, but Tessa's claim was stronger because she'd been the one to force transparency. There was a logic to it that everyone accepted. The person who broke the secret was the person most motivated to keep the system honest. She built a rationing schedule, posted it on the vault wall, and enforced it with the same measured authority she'd used to dispatch ambulances to emergencies. Firm, calm, non-negotiable. The vault changed us. The knowledge of it, the access to it, the shared responsibility for it. Before the disclosure, we'd been 9 people in a church. Afterward, we were 9 people managing a resource, which meant we were a community with something to argue about, compromise on, and protect. The arguments came, they always do, when resources are finite and fear is infinite. But they came within a structure. Tessa's schedule, Diane's accounting, Warren's maintenance. And my role? I was the custodian. I maintained the building. I checked the locks and patched the cracks and kept the physical world intact, while other people managed the human one. It was the same job I'd always had, and I was only beginning to understand that it might be more important than I'd ever given it credit for. Because buildings fail the same way people do, not all at once, but in small surrenders. A seal that loosens, a hinge that rusts, a crack in the foundation that admits water an inch at a time until the structure above it shifts in ways that can't be undone. I was the person who noticed those things, who'd always noticed them. The church board had never put me on the list because they didn't think maintenance was a survival skill. They were wrong. Day 22. The infected found the air intake. I was in the bell tower on morning watch when I heard the ventilation system change pitch, a subtle shift. The kind of thing nobody else would have registered, but that I felt immediately because I'd been listening to this building breathe for 11 years. I went to the vault and checked the filtration unit and found nothing wrong mechanically. But when I climbed to the north face of the church, where the intake vent was concealed behind a decorative stone panel, I saw them. 3 infected, clustered at the base of the wall directly beneath the vent. They weren't trying to breach it. They were standing there, faces tilted upward, oriented toward the vent with the same fixed attention I'd seen in Claire in the fellowship hall. They could smell us. The ventilation system that kept us alive was exhaling our scent into the open air, and they had followed it to its source. I went to Warren. He was in the vault, recalibrating the generator's fuel mixture to extend its life. When I told him, his face did something I hadn't seen before. A flicker of genuine fear, quickly suppressed. If they're congregating at the intake, more will come. They'll cluster. They'll attract others. It's a feedback loop. More bodies, more stimulus for additional bodies. Can we move the intake? Not without excavation equipment and time we don't have. The ductwork is cast into the foundation. Can we mask the scent? He thought. We can add a chemical filter, activated charcoal, It won't eliminate the scent, but it'll reduce it. Do we have activated charcoal? No, but we have charcoal briquettes in the kitchen storage. I can process them. Crude, but functional. Warren worked on the filter for 2 days. During that time, the cluster at the north wall grew, from 3 to 7 to 12. I watched them from the bell tower, these patient, broken congregants gathered at the base of a church they couldn't enter, drawn by the breath of the living, filtering through stone. There was something almost reverent about their stillness, a dark parody of worship that I tried not to think about too carefully. On the second day, Mia found me in the bell tower. She climbed the narrow stairs without announcement and sat down on the dusty floor beside me and looked out through the louvers at the figures below. "They're not going away," she said. "No. Mom says we have 63 days of food left." "That's right. What happens on day 64? I looked at her. 16. Losing weight despite Tessa's careful rationing, because a teenager's body burns fuel at a rate designed for growth, not conservation. She'd stopped talking about school, about her phone, about whatever life she'd been building before this. She talked about food quantities and watch schedules and the structural integrity of windows. She'd become practical in the way that only someone who's lost the luxury of abstraction can become. "I don't know," I said, "but we have 63 days to figure it out." "That's what adults always say. We'll figure it out." "It means you don't have a plan." "You're right. I don't have a plan for day 64. I have a plan for today. Today the walls hold, the food lasts, and the air flows. Tomorrow, I'll have a plan for tomorrow." She pulled her knees to her chest. "My dad always had a plan. 5-year financial plan, college savings plan, retirement plan." She rested her chin on her knees. "He planned everything except this." I didn't say anything comforting. There was nothing comforting to say that wouldn't also be dishonest. Instead, I said, "Your dad planned for you. He worked and saved and did everything he could to give you a future. The fact that the future changed doesn't mean the effort was wasted. It means he loved you in the language he had." Mia was quiet for a while. Then she said, "You sound like a pastor." "I'm a custodian." "Maybe that's the same thing. You just take care of a different part of the building." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to me since the world ended. I held it carefully, the way you hold something fragile in rough hands. Warren's charcoal filter reduced the clustering. Within 4 days, the group at the north wall had dispersed to 3 stragglers who eventually drifted away. The ventilation continued to function. We continued to breathe. But the incident had changed the calculus. We now knew that the vault's life support system was also a beacon, and that the longer we stayed, the more likely it was that a larger concentration of infected would find the signal and follow it in. The church, like the vault, was designed for shelter, not for permanence. On day 30, the hand crank radio picked up a signal. Not military this time. Civilian. A woman's voice, scratchy with interference, repeating a message on a loop. "Covenant Community, Route 60, mile marker 114. Clean water, medical facilities, perimeter security. All survivors welcome. Bring what you can carry." We listened to it 18 times. Tessa transcribed it. Warren studied it. Diane plotted the location on a gas station map Neil had in his bag. Route 60, mile marker 114, roughly 45 miles southwest, in the hill country where the terrain was steep and the roads were narrow and the population density was low. "Could be real," Ray said. "Could be a trap," Warren said. "Could be both," Tessa said. And that was the truest thing any of us had said in weeks. The debate lasted 3 days. Not a continuous argument. It moved in pulses, surfacing at meals and during watch changes and in the quiet moments when people had too much time to think. The fault lines were predictable. Ray and Sandra wanted to go. They were farm people, accustomed to open space, and the church was shrinking around them. Neil wanted to go because he was 22, and the idea of spending another 60 days underground was more frightening to him than the road. Diane wanted to go because Mia needed more than canned food and candlelight. Warren wanted to stay. The vault was his creation, his legacy, his proof that preparation mattered. Leaving it was an admission that even the best designed shelter was temporary. Tessa was undecided. She sat with the radio, listening to the loop, searching for details in the static. On the third night of the debate, she came to me in the corridor. "The voice on the radio," she said. "I've been listening to it for 3 days, hundreds of loops. There's a moment, right before the message restarts, where the recording catches a background sound. Children, kids playing. Faint, but it's there. Could be old audio, could be fabricated. Could be. But I dispatched for 6 years. I know produced audio from ambient audio. That sound is ambient. It's real. Those are real children in a real place." It wasn't proof. It wasn't certainty. It was a sound beneath a sound, detected by a woman whose entire career had been built on listening for signals in noise. But it was enough. Not enough to guarantee safety. Nothing could guarantee that. Enough to justify the risk. I called the meeting. Final vote. Not a democracy. I had no authority to impose one, but a consensus. Each person spoke. Each person chose. 7 voted to go. Warren abstained. I voted last. I voted to go. Warren looked at me across the sanctuary, and I saw him accept it. Not agree, but accept. The way an engineer accepts that a structure has been repurposed beyond its original design. The vault had been built for shelter. We were using it as a launching pad. "I'll stay," he said. "Someone should maintain the vault, in case others come." I understood what he was really saying. He couldn't leave the thing he'd built. It was too much a part of him. The vault was his life's purpose made physical. And abandoning it was a kind of death he wasn't prepared for. I could have argued. I chose not to. Some decisions belong entirely to the person making them. We left on day 35. Warren opened the tunnel, the one he'd used to arrive, running 50 yards north from the vault to the cemetery egress. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one person with a pack, and the air inside smelled of earth and old concrete. But it bypassed the church exterior entirely, emerging behind a maintenance hatch between headstones that had been there so long the grass had grown over the edges. We went at first light, single file through the tunnel. Warren at the vault entrance, checking each person through, handing out portions from the supplies. Food for 5 days per person, water purification tablets, a basic medical packet. He'd divided the vault's remaining stores with the same precision he'd brought to its construction. Half went with us, half stayed with him. I was the last one through. I stood at the tunnel entrance and looked back at the vault. The shelves, the cots, the workbench with its binder and its hand-crank radio. The fluorescent lights humming, the ventilation breathing. Warren stood in the middle of the room with his hands at his sides. He looked like a man standing in a cathedral he'd built with his own hands, preparing to worship alone. "Thank you," I said, "for building this." "It wasn't built for you." "I know. That's why I'm thanking you. Because it saved us anyway." Something shifted in his face. Not warmth, exactly. Warren wasn't built for warmth, but recognition. An acknowledgement that the thing he'd created had become something larger than his intention, and that the expansion however unplanned, had meaning. Take care of them, Eli. I'm a custodian. It's what I do. The tunnel was dark and close, and I crawled through it on my hands and knees with 45 miles of open road ahead of me and 8 people waiting on the other side. Above us, the cemetery was quiet. The church stood against the morning sky, stone and timber, built to outlast the people who worshipped in it. The group assembled among the headstones. Ray carried the heaviest pack. Sandra walked beside him. Diane had Mia by the hand. Neil shouldered his bag with the nervous energy of someone beginning a journey he isn't sure he'll finish. Tessa had the radio in her coat pocket, the volume low, the signal still repeating. We moved south through the cemetery and into the tree line beyond it. The morning was cold and clear. Behind us, the church grew smaller with each step until it was just a shape on a hill, a steeple against the sky, a place we'd sheltered and argued and confessed and survived. Ahead of us, somewhere in the hills, children were playing. We'd heard them through the static. It was enough. We walked. We reached mile marker 114 on the 4th day. The community was real. A compound built around a repurposed agricultural station on a ridgeline, ringed with earthen berms and vehicle barriers. They had generators and well water and a medical tent staffed by a veterinarian and a retired nurse. They had 37 people, including 6 children whose laughter was the sound Tessa had heard beneath the broadcast, the signal that had pulled us out of the vault and onto the road. They checked us for bites. They fed us hot food. They gave Mia a blanket that wasn't military surplus or prison issue. A quilt, handmade, with a pattern of stars. That night, I sat outside the medical tent and looked at the sky. Somewhere northeast, Warren was in the vault, alone, maintaining a shelter that might never hold anyone again. I thought about the binder, the list of 7 names, the word essential. I thought about the door I'd fallen through by accident, running from a dead woman in a church I'd cleaned for 11 years. I was never on the list. I was the custodian. I kept the building running, while the people who mattered made their plans. Now the building was empty, and the people who mattered were scattered or gone, and I was here, on a ridge, under stars, with 8 people who were alive, because a door I wasn't supposed to know about had been left unsealed. You don't have to be essential to keep things standing. You just have to be there when the structure needs you. And you have to be willing to open the door.